Time of the end. Now, there's something really, I think is just like majorly important to understand the time of the end, and that is this statement right here. We have some good news because Satan deceives and corrupts the world. Well, that's not the good news, but anyhow. But in so doing, he is only carrying on his original work. He has introduced no new arguments. He has created no new empire of darkness from which to draw supplies for the furtherance of deceptions. And sin that was sin in the beginning is sin today, and sin, the apostle declares, is the transgression of God's law. Satan's used up his playbook. Right? You know what that means? That means, unless we forget how the Lord has led us in the past and is teaching our past history, we have nothing to fear. There aren't going to be any catastrophic surprises if we're informed. So this is kind of what we've done a little bit here. We've looked at this part of history, not because history is great. I rather side with, I think it was Henry Ford, who once said, history is bunk. History for history's sake is bunk. I value history for the ability to increase to some degree my understanding of today and tomorrow. Without applications today and tomorrow, I don't think I'd have any interest in history. So what does this much teach us? Well, it teaches us what to expect here. And that's what we're aiming to slam into already. The loud cry was begun, 1892, was smothered by 1899, needs to be revived, needs to succeed in its work, and it's going to be opposed by the omega of apostasy. Such an amazing thing. I tell you, Kellogg was not a normal guy, right? So he's influential in the beginning of the loud cry in 1892, and then 10 years later, he's establishing all the principles of the great the alpha apostasy, which are the principles of... Actually, you know what? Every single technique that Lucifer used in heaven, Kellogg used. I can show it to you, right up to hypnotism. Don't think it's not going to be used again. The devil has no new arguments, but it's not going to say, oh, well, look at that. There's a handy weapon system, but we're just not going to use it. Of course he's going to use it. He's going to throw everything he's got into the final battle. You know that. And we can learn something by a little attention to some history. We left off here. These are Satan's accusations against God and his government. Jesus proved Satan wrong on 2/3 of them. There are still 2 that need to be addressed, and then number 9 just evaporates, right? Why are they still there? And what is God going to do about them? Okay, so let's look at these points here and note that they are both intricately connected with sinful human beings. Just to kind of short circuit the whole thing, why didn't Jesus solve these problems? Because he wasn't a sinner. How could he demonstrate the validity of forgiveness when he never needed forgiving? Does that make sense? Are you following me? Okay? You demonstrate, if I'm going to demonstrate that I can bench press 200 kilos, I do that by bench pressing 200 kilos. If God's going to prove that he can forgive, i.e. heal, sozo, through natural processes, as in the natural, so in the spiritual. I use a little term sometimes to describe something that concerns me, and I don't mean to be out of line in saying this, but I'm really, really, really tired of spiritual fairy dust. Right? Everybody knows what fairy dust is, right? Maybe some of you were raised in such a great environment that you don't know anything about fairies. And that's good. Fairy tales. You sprinkle a little fairy dust and the problem's solved. It's magic. God works miracles, but he doesn't work magic. There's a difference. Magic, superstition, is the belief that this thing produces that thing with no known connection between. What in the world does a black cat have to do with bad luck? How about a four-leaf clover? Why does that produce good luck? Can you show any mechanism? There's no mechanism. That's superstition. God doesn't work with superstition. He works through means which parallel what we see in the natural world. In the natural world, stuff moves from cause to effect. In the scripture, in the spiritual world, it moves from cause to effect. There's no such thing as spiritual fairy dust. Well, okay, one of the most basic things to remember about Lucifer's deceptions over time has always been his use of counterfeits, right? All the way down through history, you'll find idols to take the place of God back in Old Testament times. You find human sacrifice to take the place of the Old Testament sacrificial system. You find, somewhat more recent, you find the Mass taking the place of the heavenly ministry of Christ. Obviously, you find Sunday instead of Sabbath. You find ghosts instead of, non-intelligent, whatever, dead people. There's always a counterfeit. When in the Adventist community we bring up Satan's counterfeit at the end of time, our tendency is to jump all the way to this one. As the crowning act in the great drama of deception, Satan himself will personate Christ. There's a counterfeit. In different parts of the earth, Satan will manifest himself among men as a majestic being of dazzling brightness. That's effulgence, by the way, just to remind you of your vocabulary. Resembling the description of the Son of God given by John in the Revelation. The glory that surrounds him is unsurpassed by anything that mortal eyes have yet beheld. The shout of triumph rings out upon the air. Christ has come! Christ has come! Well, that's a counterfeit. But that's not where the counterfeits start. Not in our day. Before the final visitation of God's judgments upon the earth, there will be among the people of the Lord such a revival of primitive godliness as has not been witnessed since apostolic times. The enemy of souls desires to hinder this work, and before the time for such a movement shall come, he will endeavor to prevent it by introducing a counterfeit. Under a religious guise, Satan will seek to extend his influence over the Christian world. Okay, fine. What does a counterfeit $20 bill look like? Thank you. It's not a great job if it doesn't, okay? What kind of a counterfeit does Satan produce here? A counterfeit of? Revival. And where's my little button here? There we go. Primitive godliness. Not since apostolic times. What does primitive godliness look like? That's an interesting comment. I'm not sure how you're applying that, so maybe I'll sidestep that one for right now. Primitive godliness. When did we see primitive godliness? Apostolic times. What did Jesus tell the apostles to do? Go out and preach the kingdom of God is at hand and to heal the sick. Every single time the gospel commission is given, it includes heal the sick. True healing, yeah. Mm-hmm. What would a counterfeit primitive godliness look like? It's going to look like medical missionary work. You need to wrap your heads around that. It's going to look like what God is calling his church to do. If it doesn't, it's not a very good counterfeit. How do I know that? I kept reading the book. That's a trick I learned in school. The idea of the devil's counterfeits just keeps showing up, right? But we tend to focus so much on counterfeit doctrine, which is important, that it's easy for us to overlook the practical, tangible work that Christ's church is called to do. The last great delusion is soon to open before us. Antichrist is to perform his marvelous works in our sight. So closely will the counterfeit resemble the true that it will be impossible to distinguish between them except by the Holy Scriptures. By their testimony, every statement and every miracle must be tested. Okay, you've seen this, you know this. But notice, we're talking marvelous works and we're talking miracle. This isn't the normal. This isn't just doctrinal counterfeit. This is moving into the realm of the supernatural. Wonderful scenes with which Satan will be closely connected will soon take place. God's word declares that Satan will work miracles. He will make people sick and then will suddenly remove from them his satanic power. They will then be regarded as healed. These works of apparent healing will bring Seventh-day Adventists to the test. Many who have had great light will fail to walk in the light because they have not become one with Christ. His instruction is not palatable. What kind of instruction is not palatable? It doesn't taste good. They failed to become one with Christ because it didn't leave the right taste in their mouth. Here's where it gets rubber on the road. Satan can present a counterfeit so closely resembling the truth that it deceives those who are willing to be deceived. And then there's a comma, and then there's an ellipsis. That comma is setting off a non-determinative clause. It's going to be a definition of what it means to be willing to be deceived. So, let's just try it out for size. Raise your hands if you want me to lie to you. Who's that stupid? Who could possibly be so stupid as to say, I am willing to be deceived? It's a little deeper than that. Now, if you actually know this particular statement, don't tell me. But if you're trying to figure it out, little class participation here. Anybody have a guess what it takes to be willing to be deceived? Okay. Now, willing to not change your opinion? What's that? Complacency. Yeah, those are both, stubbornness and complacent stubbornness is an issue. Okay. Yes, in the back. Blindness or ignorance, yes. Okay. Now, I'm going to back up a screen. I'll just tell you I'm backing up so you know. Look at that last sentence. What does it take to be deceived? That's in great controversy. Self-denial and self-sacrifice are unpalatable to the natural, unconverted heart. Always have been always will be. This is the point that Lucifer rebelled over. I should just take care of myself. You should take care of yourself. You know what you need. Why do I have to spend my time worrying about everybody else? I've got my hands full taking care of number one. This is the central issue of the entire great controversy. Because the law of heaven says love your neighbor as yourself. And that, by definition, means self-denial and self-sacrifice. That's what Jesus came to show was the character of his Father. And where did it end up for him? It is finished. That's self-denial and self-sacrifice. Where could we possibly learn how to enjoy self-denial and self-sacrifice? I'm just going to throw something in. It's a totally different sermon. I don't have the chance to go into this. But at the end of the day, your desire is always going to win. I'll just tell you that. You may have great thoughts. Pastor Brake shared some of this last night. You know what's right, but desire always wins. So the answer is you've got to change desire. God has got to change your desire. Because if you're going to do it by gritting your teeth, you're going to end up needing a night guard. I make those sometimes. I make night guards. So you're going to need a night guard. Because if you're just going to grit your teeth, it's just going to wear down those molars, man. And you're going to have TMJ. You're going to have headaches. You're going to have the whole problem going on for you. Okay. The Lord needs to change your desire. Your heart needs to be changed. Mine too. I'm not lecturing at you, but how can we possibly, what mechanism has the Lord given us to change our hearts so that we enjoy self-denial and self-sacrifice? And Jesus did not grit his teeth. I'm having to steal some things from this other sermon because it's important. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus prayed, not my will, but thine be done. Do you ever stop and think about that? Jesus didn't want to do what his Father wanted him to do. At that point, there was a separation of will. Not my will, but thine be done. That was the submission, the struggle of submission. But then it's fascinating. God the Father sent Gabriel to strengthen Jesus there in the Garden of Gethsemane. Gabriel did not come and moralize. Jesus, you promised to do this back before the creation of the world. Remember, you promised. It's morally incumbent upon you. You have to go through with this. He didn't say that. He didn't use common sense and logic. Well, Jesus, we've invested a lot of time and effort in this plan, and then if you don't go through with this now, that's really going to kind of throw a monkey wrench into everything. It's probably the best thing. You need to go through with this. He didn't do that. You know what he did? He said, there will be millions of people saved through eternity. You will see the travail of your soul and be satisfied. It was for the joy that was set before him that he endured the cross. Don't spend your life gritting your teeth. I remember as a teenager making my own personal observations of Adventists that it seemed to me were gritting their teeth pretty hard to do what they thought was the right thing to do. And somehow, I just have to be honest, it didn't appeal to me. Now, they weren't the only ones I saw. There were exceptions, or not exceptions, but there were people that I looked up to and admired. And I thought, these guys have something going on there that makes sense. But the idea of just gritting your teeth and getting through it, that's not a good thing. got to go ahead here. Let's see. I'm just going to skip over this. But notice here that in the process of Lucifer's counterfeit, he heals the diseases of the people. Why is he doing that? Because he's trying to counterfeit Jesus. Satan will come in to deceive, if possible, the very elect. He claims to be Christ, and he's coming in pretending to be the great medical missionary. Makes sense. Christ's method alone will give true success. I'm going to skip over this. The great object, we saw this, reveal the Father, reveal the Father, reveal the Father. Yeah, we saw that. World needs today what it needed 1900 or 2,000 years ago, a revelation of Christ. Well, he's not here. So what's plan B? Jesus isn't here. What are we going to do now, Lord? Well, there you go. What the world needs today is the light of Christ's example reflected from the lives of Christ-like men and women. And I'm just telling you that the fundamental principle of Christ-likeness is self-denial and self-sacrifice. God's purpose in committing to men and women the mission that he committed to Christ is to disentangle his followers from all worldly policy and to give them a work identical with the work that Christ did. Identical is a pretty strong word. You maybe noticed I used that on the title of that little book that I handed out yesterday. That's where that comes from. A work identical with the work Christ did. The glory of the character of Christ can never be expressed in words. Jesus couldn't do it. Right? Remember we saw that yesterday? Jesus couldn't express the character of his Father in words. Human language is inadequate to reveal it. It must be made manifest in life. If Jesus couldn't do it, there's a pretty good chance we can't. Just guessing. Right? It must be made manifest in the life. It is to be manifest in the individual Christian, the family, in the church, in the ministry of the word, in every institution established by God's people. Christ, the great medical missionary, is our example. He healed the sick and preached the gospel. In his service, healing, and teaching were linked closely together. Today, they are not to be separated. Why? Because medical missionary work is our tool, is God's tool, to help us learn to love self-denial and self-sacrifice. Have you ever cared for an invalid? It's a lot of self-denial and self-sacrifice. It's a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. It's wearing. Holy Spirit never has divorced these two. Let's just go on. I've got to be quick. The union of Christ-like work for the body and Christ-like work for the soul is the true interpretation of the gospel. A little more grammar here real fast. The, it's the definite article, not a or not and. It's the true interpretation, meaning that all other interpretations are false. Let's go ahead. When men begin to weave in the human threads, okay. So I get concerned sometimes. I say it myself. Well, I don't know, not too commonly, because I'm kind of whatever on this point. But a lot of times people will say things like, "Oh man, did you hear the latest terrible news? The world's getting so bad that Christ has to come soon." Well, yes and no. There's a yes to that, but there's also a big no to that. God is not waiting on the world to get wicked. He's waiting on his people to manifest the character of Christ. When men begin to weave in the human threads to compose the pattern of the web, the Lord is in no hurry. He waits until men shall lay down their own human inventions and will accept the Lord's way and the Lord's will. The Lord's way is self-denial and self-sacrifice. What that means in any given situation, that's above my pay grade. I can't figure that out for you. I'm challenged enough figuring it out for myself. But I'm absolutely convinced that self-denial and self-sacrifice is what God is waiting to see in his people. These are my summary thoughts. God's final work uses the same method that Christ used during his life on earth, the revelation of the character of God. God's final work requires that human beings take up the same manner of work that Jesus practiced during his life on earth, preaching, teaching, helping, healing. The revelation of God's character cannot be accomplished through words alone. Acts of mercy and healing are necessary. In short, God's final work is self-sacrifice, self-denial, exemplified in helping others, i.e., that's id est, by the way, and it means, in other words, medical missionary work. The truth for this time. The third angel's message is to be proclaimed with a loud voice, M dash, meaning with increasing power, M dash, as we approach the great final test. This test must come to the church in connection with the true ellipses, dots. The true what? The great final test is going to come in connection with the true something. It implies there's a false something. What's the true false issue at the end of time? Oh, false second coming? But this is before the close of probation, though, because this is the third angel's message being proclaimed. What's that? Worship? Okay, yeah. Sabbath, Sunday, true Sabbath, false Sunday. That's all true, but that's not what this statement says. Medical missionary work. A work that has the great physician to dictate and preside in all that it comprehends. The great final test must come to the churches in connection with true medical missionary work. Why? Because it's the true issue of the great controversy, the central issue of the whole enchilada. The foundation of apostasy would be built upon the sand, and storm and tempest would sweep away the structure. Now, we talked very little about the alpha of apostasy with Kellogg, right? Ellen White describes what the alpha apostasy would have grown into if it hadn't been checked. Fortunately, God had a messenger there who managed to check it to a very large degree. And so it never took on the proportions, it never had its full development. She says almost nothing about the nature or the circumstances or the whatever of the omega apostasy. My personal belief is that what the alpha would have grown into is the best description we have of what the omega will be. At the very end of the description of the alpha, she has this sentence: the foundation of this apostasy would be built on the sand, and storm and tempest would sweep away the structure. Where does that terminology come from? Can you sing it? The wise man built his house upon a rock, and the rains came a-tumbling down. True. Storm and tempest would sweep away the structure of the counterfeit omega apostasy. Some interesting things about that little parable. It's amazing. I think the parable is like 5 verses long or something like that. And Jesus packed a lot into that. In the parable, there's no difference noted about the two houses except for the foundation. They might have looked like cookie-cutter suburbia houses, the exact same floor plan or something. But one was founded on the rock, one was on the sand. There are 2 houses. There's only one storm. That's key. This is not where God looks down and he says, oh, look at this very righteous man. I'm going to send him April showers so he can have Mayflowers. Won't that be pretty? And oh, look, there's an evil sinner. I'm going to hit him with a Cat 5 hurricane. That's not the way it is. It's the same storm. The same storm hits God's work and Satan's counterfeit at the end of time. And it wipes out the one and it leaves the other. Because the foundation. Well, what do you think the storm and tempest would be? Well, it's not a big mystery. It's what we call the little time of trouble. So when the world starts falling apart, which perhaps has already begun, it's looking that way. In the last scenes of this earth's history, war will rage. There will be pestilence, plague, and famine. The waters of the deep will overflow their boundaries. Property and life will be destroyed by fire and flood. And you just go through that list, and it's all happened in like the last year. on a fairly decent scale. It's probably going to get worse. Never underestimate the devil's ability to make things worse. Just don't do that, because he'll probably outdo himself. Perilous times are before us. The whole world will be involved in perplexity and distress. Disease of every kind will be upon the human family, and such ignorance as now prevails concerning the laws of health would result in great suffering and the loss of many lives that might be saved. Maybe we ought to consider that. As religious aggression subverts the liberties of our nation, primarily talking about the United States, but I think we can, maybe stretch it a little further north here. Those who would stand for freedom of conscience will be placed in unfavorable positions for their own sake. That's a word to the wise. For your own sake. If you're not foolish, you will do this, right? For their own sake, they should, while they have opportunity, become intelligent in regard to disease, its causes, prevention, and cure. Those who do this will find a field of labor anywhere. There will be suffering ones, plenty of them, who will need help, not only among those of our own faith, but largely among those who know not the truth. You know what? When you just saved some guy's life, he's often willing to listen to your Bible study. It's a great opening wedge. God's followers at the end of time are going to be ministering to these many suffering ones about them because they've become intelligent in regard to disease, its cause, prevention, and cure, and they have imbibed the principles of self-denial and self-sacrifice. And they're going to be working to help. And the devil's going to have a vastly greater assemblage of people who are working to help as well. Because that's what a counterfeit's all about. But storm and tempest will sweep away the structure. Well, how's that? That's pretty simple, actually. Things get tight. The very foundation of Christ's mission was self-denial and self-sacrifice. And selfishness lies at the foundation of all sin. What were the two houses built on? Lucifer's principle of rebellion and God's principle of the law of heaven. That's all it is. It's kind of dirt simple. And when things get tough and supplies get low, because helping people always costs you, it costs you money, it costs you time, it costs you effort, it costs you food, it costs you clothing, it costs you everything that they need because you're giving it to them. And eventually, times are going to get tough and supplies are going to get low, and the selfish heart is going to look around and say, hold it, there's only enough food for two, and it ain't going to be you. And God's people are going to be in the same predicament. Jesus gave us a sample of this twice, actually, during his time on earth. The one we're most familiar with, he turns around to Philip and he says, Philip, it's a lot of people here. How are we going to feed them all? And Philip, being a rational guy, says, I don't know, it's going to cost a lot of money. And Jesus said, yeah, well, whatever. Just have them sit down. And then he takes care of it. Now, the interesting thing is that miracles are not going to be the major element of God's work at the end of time. And how he takes care of it without working miracles in a blatant way, I don't know. I'm sure I'll have some surprises if I get to see these things. But the selfish heart is simply not going to go any further. Storm and tempest will sweep away their structure. In the last great conflict of the controversy with Satan, those who are loyal to God will see every earthly support cut off. That's in Desire of Ages. I used to teach a Bible class out of Desire of Ages. I'd run into that every year. And I'd always think, man, that's going to be a tough deal. I mean, every earthly support. That means no job, no house, no food, no protection by the police. They don't care about you anymore. Every earthly support is cut off. And I thought, man, that's going to be a tough deal. And then one day I was reading along in Volume 4 of the Testimonies, and I ran into this statement. It is safe to let go every earthly support and take the hand of him who lifted up and saved the sinking disciple on the stormy sea. Oh, that's nice. It's safe. That's comforting. And my curiosity got the better of me, and it's so easy today. Just type it in and hit enter, right? So I typed in every earthly support. So I wonder if she ever talks about that again. Yeah, she does. We can never perfect a round, full Christian experience until every earthly support is removed and the soul centers its entire affections about God. When was it ever a good idea for Christians to depend on the earth, on earthly support? Exactly when was that a great idea? It's never been a great idea. But it's a weaning process. Got to hurry. Pray much for those you are trying to help. Let them see that your dependence is upon a higher power and you will win. So how do you let them see that your dependence is upon a higher power? You pray with them and you frankly admit that it's over your pay grade. I don't have the heart-lung machine I need right now. I don't have this. I don't have that. I've got to depend on a higher power. Let them see that. Now, you can't let them see that when you've always got everything that you need. Does that make sense? You're out on a limb here. And that's when they get to see that you depend on a higher power. God desires everyone to understand the hateful character of selfishness and to cooperate with him in guarding his human family against its terrible deceptive power. This is the basic principle of the great controversy. The first result of the entrance of sin into the world was the birth of principles of selfishness. The design of the gospel is, by means of remedial missionary work, to confront this evil of selfishness and destroy its destructive power by establishing enterprises of benevolence. Okay, remedial. Everybody knows what a remedial course is, right? You go to college and you can't really do math. You get a remedial math course. Can't really do English, you get bonehead English, right? Okay, it's got to get you up to speed. It's the remedy. Now, this remedial medical missionary work here, I guess it doesn't say medical, this remedial missionary work, who do you think is being remedied? All those sinners out there? I think it's us. Primarily, right? To confront this evil of selfishness in our hearts and destroy its destructive power by establishing enterprises of benevolence. What's benevolence? Anybody speak Spanish? Bueno? Italian? Bene? Just means good, right? Benevolence is doing good things. Kellogg was onto something with his sermons about the good works, right? Enterprises of benevolence are to change our hearts so that we enjoy self-denial and self-sacrifice, and we can look forward to the joy that is set before him. Okay, so how's the mechanics work? I am so cooked. Okay. We have these two things to deal with, right? I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit here. This is kind of a summary slide. Okay, God, if you can't change your law, that means you can't ever forgive anyone, because if the law is beyond your control, so is the penalty. That's his argument. He said, your law is arbitrary, God, you can change it. God says, no, I can't. He said, well, if you can't change it, it's like a left hook, right jab, right? Or whichever, it's a knockout combo. They've got him in a box. God has something interesting to say about that. This is amazing, this next little statement. Right and wrong are not based upon God's moral government. God's moral government is based upon a distinction between right and wrong. The erroneous view which many have of this subject causes them to rebel against God's law of government as arbitrary. Satan's number 7 accusation. Isn't that fascinating? I mean, this is like deep stuff. God's law is not based, or right and wrong is not based on God's law. God's law is based on right and wrong. Does it make any difference? I mean, is this like a chicken and the egg type of a thing? Apparently it makes a difference, because the wrong concept causes many to rebel against God's government. Right and wrong is the foundation of God's government. It's based upon it. It's built upon the distinction of right and wrong. God's law is not arbitrary. He didn't say, and now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you what will be right and what will be wrong. He can't change it. Contrary to the practice of some denominations which shall remain anonymous, he can't offer us an indulgence, And now, due to a special what's the word I want? A special something or other of divine grace, lying will be acceptable from now till the end of the year. God can't do that because his law doesn't control right and wrong. Right and wrong is the foundation. His law is built on it. Lucifer didn't understand that. Lucifer said, God, your law is arbitrary. You defined right and wrong, just define it differently. Let us drive a little faster. It's kind of slow out here on the freeway. And God said, the law is immutable, unchangeable, perfect. Can't do that. And Lucifer says, okay, then you can't forgive him. Got ya. Ha, got ya. This is a big part of Satan's plans. Satan laid his plans a long time ago to wrest from God, to steal from God, the noble Adam and his companion Eve. If he could in any way beguile them to disobedience, God would make some provision whereby they might be pardoned. And then himself and all the fallen angels would be in a fair way to share with them of God's mercy. I know how much he loves these guys. I told him not to build them in the first place, but he built them. He loves them. I get them to sin. He's going to find a way to forgive them. And when he does that, he's going to change the law. And everybody's going to say, Lucifer was right. God changed the law. The law can't be changed. Lucifer is the smartest guy on the block after all. He reasoned that if God pardoned sinful man whom he had created, he would also pardon and receive into favor him and his angels. But he was disappointed. Oh, I love this understatement. It's like so cool. He went right off the deep end into a homicidal, rage for the rest of his existence. Okay, that's disappointment on a satanic scale. Lucifer couldn't imagine any way to forgive without changing the law. He thought he had God in a box. Those humans, you thought it was such a good idea to create, they sinned, so they have to die. Unless, of course, you decide to be reasonable and change your law, which I suggested a long while ago, you may remember. He's using this same argument all the way up to the close of probation. Oh, either way I went, yeah, right. All the way up to the close. This is Testimonies Volume 5. This is after the close of human probation. Satan declares, will God banish me and my angels from his presence and yet reward those who have been guilty of the same sins? Thou canst not do this, O Lord, in justice. Thy throne will not stand in righteousness and judgment. Justice demands that sentence be pronounced against them. Every sin must be punished. Does he want every sin punished? Well, not on your life. He's got jersey number 1. It's called brinkmanship diplomacy. 2 guys wrestling on the brink of a cliff. I'm going to throw you over the cliff. Yeah, you can do that, but I'm hanging on to you. Wrestling on the edge of the precipice. Brinkmanship diplomacy. This is what Lucifer's doing. He says, you've got to kill him. You've got to kill him. It's fascinating. He's betting his entire existence on the fact that God loves you. That ought to say something. God isn't playing on that script, however. God is going to show through his people that he doesn't need to change his law in order to be just. He's going to be both just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. You see what Paul's talking about? He's talking about Lucifer's accusations. That's what Paul is talking about. Lucifer said you can't be just and keep your law solid and justify them. You can't do both. Nah. And God says, just watch. Just watch. And the universe has been watching for 6,000 years because he hasn't demonstrated it yet. And that's why 7 and 8 are still on the table. That's why we have progressive revelation. It's good. God is still working through his plan. Even as a sinner, man was in a different position from that of Satan. Lucifer in heaven had sinned in the light of God's glory. To him, as to no other created being, was given a revelation of God's love. Understanding the character of God, knowing his goodness, Satan chose to follow his own selfish, independent will. This choice was final. There was no more that God could do to save him. Whoa, stop right there. What could God do to save Lucifer? At that point, nothing. Why was there no more? Because Lucifer had seen the character of God. The only weapon God has in the great controversy, the only tool he has in the plan of salvation is the revelation of his own character. And Lucifer had seen it. So that choice was final. There was no more that God could do to save him. But man was deceived. His mind was darkened by Satan's sophistry. The height and depth of the love of God he did not know. For him, there was hope in a knowledge of God's love. By beholding his character, he might be drawn back to God. Hence, the incarnation. When Jesus came to reveal the character of the Father. That was the only thing that was going to work. Only thing had any chance of working. And what does it mean to be drawn back to God? Once again, have confidence in God, which is called faith, and it's a very simple matter. Abraham saw Christ. The supernatural light was given him, and he acknowledged Christ's divine character. But Abraham was tested. The command came for him to take his son, his only son Isaac, and offer him as a sacrifice. This terrible ordeal was imposed upon Abraham that he might see the day of Christ. Interesting. Abraham learned of God the greatest lesson ever given to mortal. His prayer that he might see Christ before he should die was answered. He saw Christ. He saw all that mortal can see and live. By making an entire surrender, he was able to understand the vision of Christ which had been given him. Here's the problem. Gaining a knowledge of God takes more than simply understanding certain facts. The only way to really understand the character of God is to live it ourselves. The only way Abraham could see the day of Christ was to go through that experience of offering his son. And that, coincidentally, is what the universe wants to see. The conclusive proof that human beings can be healed from the infection of sin is for them to live out their faith in God, no matter the cost, like Abraham did. That's what proves human beings can be safe in heaven. And any inhabitant of heaven would have a vested interest in making sure they don't bring sin back in, right? It didn't work well last time. Let's not do that again. What's more, because the changes brought about through natural means, the revelation of the character of God, the impartation of faith, the growth of faith, right? The working out of simple faith to its full and final extent, it proves that there's nothing arbitrary about the process. There's no favoritism at all. Human beings are shown the character of God. Lucifer had seen the character of God. Those who reject the character of God are beyond hope. Those who accept the character and grow and live and understand it more and more by participation in self-denial and self-sacrifice, their faith grows. In the character of God's people, a living testimony will be born that will contradict the fallacy of Satan, who has declared that the law of Jehovah is arbitrary and holds its subjects under a cruel bondage. That's one reason I know that that's still on the table. It's because the conclusion comes through God's people. The Lord desires through his people to answer Satan's charges by showing the results of obedience to right principles. God's claim that it's non-arbitrary. Lucifer says, no, it's arbitrary. And God says, no, it's not. He says, well, then you can't forgive. Okay, you got that clear already? God says, just watch. It's going to happen. And Lucifer has a few words to say. When pigs fly. You don't have the power, God, to heal them. You can never restore faith. I got him. God, of course, sees it somewhat differently. He knows that the law of heaven is every bit as real as the law of gravity. Laws like that don't depend on the king or parliament or Congress or city hall. They come from a more basic reality than any of those things. God's law is based on the distinction between right and wrong. See, God's law doesn't define right and wrong. It's based on it. So God understands the law of sin and death. He knows it full well. It's real as gravity. Satan can see no way to possibly forgive anyone, but to change the law. He looks at the situation like Nebuchadnezzar, right? He's got a law in his hands now that's going to kill Daniel. He didn't want to kill Daniel. That was a mistake. I didn't see that coming. What are you going to do? Well, Nebuchadnezzar didn't find any answer. God had to send an angel and arbitrarily interfere with the process. Lucifer would go ballistic over that. He does every time. Every time God stops, protects us from too much temptation, Lucifer goes ballistic. You can count on it. So God's working to get through that. God is not like Nebuchadnezzar. God is like Ahasuerus. Remember the other story? Esther? They had a law. The law was going to kill Esther, Mordecai, and all the Jews. And the king says, oh, that was a dumb thing. How did I ever get into that situation? But the law couldn't be changed. It's kind of an interesting parallel. So what did Ahasuerus do? He said, Mordecai, figure this one out. Here's my ring. And Mordecai and Esther sat down and they wrote a new law. Now, God's not coming up with a new law, but there is another law. God has a few words to say about Lucifer's argument at the end of time. Lucifer says, when pigs fly, and God comes back with a really fascinating response. I'm putting words in his mouth. You're not going to find this in the Spirit of Prophecy. You can search, but it is for illustrative purposes. Planes don't do away with gravity. They just use aerodynamics. God doesn't do away with the law of sin and death. He uses the law of faith and the spirit of life. Oh, isn't that fascinating? You can listen to your local airport scanner all day long, and you're never going to hear, this is United Flight 1375, ready to take off. Please cancel gravity at 07:15 hours so we can get out of here. They don't do that. There's another law. The law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus has made me free from the law of sin and death. It's biblical. The atonement of Christ is not a mere skillful way to have our sins pardoned. It is a divine remedy. Remedy. What kind of word is that? Medical. Okay, you might have noticed that. Doctors deal with remedies, right? It is a divine remedy for the cure of transgression and the restoration of spiritual health. It is the heaven-ordained means by which the righteousness of Christ may be not only upon us, but in our hearts and characters. As in the natural, so in the spiritual. Sin is a deficiency disease caused by a lack of faith. It can be treated by the revelation of the character of God, which inspires faith. It can be cured by participation in self-denial and self-sacrifice, enterprises of benevolence. And health ministry is a vital part of this process.
To be aware of new videos like this one, be sure to subscribe to the Preparing for the Time of Trouble channel. For more free videos and downloadable audio podcasts, as well as handouts, go to www.preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com. Topic categories include recordings of live seminar presentations, country living, sustainable gardening, homestead remedies, how to be self-sufficient when the grid goes down, wild edible and medicinal plants, hydrotherapy, and end-time Bible prophecies. To take advantage of these free resources, go to preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com.